Why did they laugh the moment she stepped off the Chinook? The dust hadn't even settled, and already the joke started low mutters at first, then louder, as if carried by the desert wind. She was small, barely 5'5", her frame swallowed by fatigues that looked a size too large. The weight of a duffel bag dragged one shoulder down, and the awkward hard case she clutched knocked against her knee with each step. $10 says she's a general's daughter, someone whispered. Or maybe she thought she signed up for fishing, not war. Laughter rippled under the shelter roofs. It wasn't cruel in the open, not yet, but it was sharp enough to cut. The master sergeant waiting for her, Blackwood, didn't even bother hiding his smirk. Arms crossed, stance wide, he had the look of a man who'd spent years ensuring everyone knew who carried authority here. His eyes narrowed on the hard case. "That must be our new specialist," he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard. "Looks like she packed her fishing rod." The helicopter lifted away, wind whipping grit into the air. She squinted against it but didn't slow her pace. Specialist. The name was on her file, but the file itself, incomplete, fragmented, had stirred more questions than answers. No prior postings listed. No specialization filled. Just a transfer order from somewhere higher, stamped and sealed, leaving the details in shadow. To Blackwood, she looked like a misfiled piece of paper. "Specialist," he called when she drew near. "Yes, Master Sergeant." Her voice was quiet, measured. "Welcome to Fob Obsidian. You're late. Your uniform's non-regulation, and whatever's in that case goes to the armory immediately." She nodded once, understood. No protest, no smile, no attempt to smooth the edges of the exchange. Just a steady acceptance, like she'd heard such dismissals before and long since stopped wasting energy fighting them. Inside the armory, the mocking escalated. Weapons specialist Finch was waiting, and he prided himself on putting rookies in their place. He lifted the case from her hands with exaggerated strain, grunting like it weighed twice its real mass. "What's in here? Bowling balls," he quipped, earning chuckles from the others. He popped the latches, then stopped mid-sentence. Inside lay a M82A1, 50 caliber, nearly 30 pounds of steel and recoil. Finch blinked, then whistled. "Well, isn't that cute? They gave you the big gun." He lifted it out as though to prove his point, his smirk returning. "Sweetheart, this thing weighs half of what you do. You sure you didn't mean to ask for an M24, more your size?" Stood expressionless. "Will there be anything else?" Finch barked a laugh, signing off the weapon forms with a flourish. She accepted the papers, gathered her things, and left without a word. The silence she carried with her seemed almost heavier than the itself. That night in the mess hall she sat alone. Tray balanced neatly, eyes lowered but alert, chewing methodically. Conversations dimmed as she passed, then rose again with pointed bursts of laughter. To most, she was already a punchline. Except for one. Lieutenant watched her differently, not with amusement, not with contempt, but with curiosity. "Something interesting about our new arrival." Blackwood dropped into the seat opposite him, tray loud against the metal. "Just wondering why she's here," replied. "Transfer paperwork came straight from JSOC headquarters." Blackwood snorted. "JSOC sent us a pixie with a cannon, someone's idea of a joke." But wasn't convinced. His gaze lingered on the woman in the corner, on the way her posture didn't sag under the weight of ridicule. Instead, she seemed to absorb it, file it away, carry it like another piece of gear. The next morning's briefing only deepened the divide. Captain outlined the mission with brisk efficiency, perimeter secured by Alpha Team, Bravo providing overwatch from marked coordinates. No wasted words, no room for interruption. Until a hand went up in the back row. "Specialist," the captain acknowledged, her tone already irritated. "The western approach has better cover," said evenly, "and the wind direction favors long-range support from there." The room fell silent. Operators glanced at each other, amusement twitching at the corners of their mouths. She's a meteorologist now too, Blackwood muttered under his breath. We'll stick with the original plan, snapped. Dismissed. The others filed out, murmuring their amusement, but stayed behind, jotting notes in a weatherproof notebook, consulting a small handheld device that looked suspiciously like a specialized weather meter. She wasn't bluffing. Later that day on the range, Blackwood handed her Station 8. The worst lane. Crosswinds whipped unpredictably through the valley, humbling rookies and veterans alike. She said nothing, just carried the to position, checked her scope, adjusted her body. When the time came, she fired 5 shots in controlled succession. When they checked the targets, all 5 holes clustered within 3 inches. Not spectacular, not miraculous, but under those conditions undeniable. Adequate, Blackwood said flatly, but adequate doesn't cut it in the field. She nodded once, began cleaning her rifle with robotic care. Shoots like a machine, Finch muttered later. No instinct, all mechanical. But had seen it differently. That wasn't luck. That was calculation, that was control, that was something they weren't seeing. That night, walking past her quarters, glimpsed her door ajar. Inside, the lay disassembled across her bunk. She sat cross-legged, head bent, hands working with precise rhythm. Not the hasty maintenance of a soldier passing time, but something deeper. A ritual, every piece handled like it mattered, every action carrying memory. Elsewhere, voices crackled over secure lines. Captain spoke with someone far above her pay grade. Her files nearly blacked out. I don't understand why she's been assigned here. I'm responsible for the lives of my people. She paused, listening. Understood. We'll proceed. The next alarm came at 200, a surprise drill. Sirens shattered the silence. Operators scrambled into the dark, shouting, fumbling toward assigned positions. The scenario was simple: hostile breach, repel the threat. 15 minutes later, Blackwood's entire team was dead. Not real dead, but eliminated. Tagged out by role players who knew exactly how to exploit blind spots. All except her. While others clung to their bunkers, she had vanished. Slipped to a dry riverbed no one had ordered covered. From there, she picked off every enemy approach that others had missed. When the exercise ended, Blackwood stormed to her position. You were assigned to the north bunker, he barked. You abandoned your post. The north bunker was compromised from the start, she said quietly. The dry riverbed gave better fields of fire. That's not your call to make, specialist. You follow orders. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed her face. Not defiance, not fear, something heavier. Her fingers brushed the edge of a scar near her collar, a mark of another time she'd been told to follow orders when following had cost lives. Yes, Master Sergeant. The next evening the air shifted. Colonel entered the mess hall, rare, unsettling. Her presence always carried weight, but never more than now, with a major operation only hours away. And she didn't walk alone. Beside her, still in field gear, walked Specialist. Conversations died. Chairs froze mid-scrape. Attention, Captain called, and silence spread like oil. Surveyed the room. Tomorrow's mission parameters have changed. The target has moved. New location, a compound in the eastern mountains. Distance from insertion, approximately 3,000 meters. Murmurs erupted. That range pushed the limits of even their best shooters. Given these changes, continued, Specialist will take point on the long-range element. The silence that followed was electric. With respect, Colonel, Blackwood started, his voice hot. My team has 3 qualified snipers. We don't need. This isn't a debate, Master Sergeant. Her tone cut through steel. Has the skill set required. Finch laughed sharp and loud. The girl with the hand cannon, she can barely carry it. Then another voice, older, heavier with authority. That's a Zulu badge. All eyes turned to the doorway. Chief Warrant Officer Mercer stood there, a legend in his own right, respected by all. His gaze was fixed not on her weapon, not on her frame, but on a small insignia partially visible at her collar. "There are only 8 people alive authorized to wear that," he said, voice low. "What's a Zulu badge?" someone asked. Mercer stepped forward. "It's awarded for confirmed kills beyond 3,000 meters. Hers says 3,200. The room went still. His eyes lifted, finally meeting theirs. Her voice was quiet, barely more than a breath. 3,241 meters. Through a sandstorm, 1 shot. The air shifted. Laughter died. Doubt froze. What moments earlier had been ridicule transformed into something else, something unspoken. Blackwood's disbelief cracked into something. A dawning realization that what he'd mocked was something beyond his comprehension. And for the first time since she had arrived, wasn't invisible. She was the storm they hadn't seen coming. What made her so calm, standing in that room where everyone had just ridiculed her? The silence after her words felt heavier than gunfire. Operators who'd mocked her only hours ago now stared as if they were looking at a stranger. The storm outside pressed against the mess hall walls, dust rattling glass panes, but no one spoke. Colonel cut through the stillness. Specialist was transferred here from a joint command unit whose designation remains classified. Her operational history is restricted. What you need to know is simple. Tomorrow's mission requires her. And that was it. No further explanation, no room for questions. Stood motionless at her side, posture unchanged, as though she'd expected this all along. Not prideful, not defensive, just steady. The room broke slowly, soldiers drifting away in muted disbelief. Finch lingered, shaking his head. Blackwood followed, jaw clenched tight. Only Lieutenant stayed a moment longer, eyes locked on her, as if trying to piece together what kind of soldier carries both ridicule and reverence in the same breath. Later that night, on the observation deck above the base, found her again. She leaned on the railing, a small weather meter in her hand, watching numbers flicker on its screen as the desert wind whipped her hair loose from its bun. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" His voice was careful, not mocking, not accusing. She didn't answer right away. She adjusted the instrument, wrote in her notebook, her hands moving with quiet certainty. Finally she spoke. "The doesn't care who pulls the trigger. It either hits or it misses. Everything else," she paused, her eyes catching faint starlight, "is noise." Shifted beside her. "Still, all that grief you took from Blackwood, from Finch, from the whole team, you could shut it down in 1 shot." She looked at him fully then. There was something there, not anger, not even hurt, but a shadow of memory etched into gray eyes. "Proving them wrong wouldn't bring anyone back," she said softly. Her hand brushed unconsciously at the scar above her collar. Didn't push. He just stood beside her, feeling the wind. Somewhere in the distance, jackals howled. The morning of the mission came cold and clear. The eastern mountains glowed pale under a rising sun, jagged shadows stretching across valleys. Lay prone on the, assembling her with hands that moved like clockwork. No wasted energy, no flourish. Blackwood settled beside her, the unlikely choice for her spotter. He had resisted the assignment, but orders were orders. And maybe, though he'd never admitted aloud, curiosity had drawn him here. "Target building is approximately 3,100 meters," he reported, scanning through his high-powered scope. "Winds variable, 10 to 12 knots northwest, temperature 62, humidity 22%. She checked the readings herself, the same numbers, but not the same conclusions. "The valley creates a corkscrew effect," she murmured, nodding figures in her notebook. 3 distinct wind environments between us and target." Blackwood frowned. "That's not in any calculation tables." "It wouldn't be." She flipped pages filled with equations far beyond standard sniper school math. Lines of variables, adjustments, corrections. He watched her, curiosity breaking through his skepticism. "How long have you been doing this?" "My father taught me when I was 8, she said, never pausing in her adjustments. He was a physicist, treated shooting as applied mathematics. Blackwood blinked, and the badge that shot. Her hand stilled for just a second, then resumed. We'd been hunting a bomb maker for months. My team was hit bad. I was the only one left mobile. Command scrubbed the mission. But I had his location 3,241 meters across a valley through a sandstorm. They authorized the shot. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I didn't ask. The conversation ended there. Her body stilled, breathing slowed, mind sinking into the state where the world narrows to scope, wind, heartbeat. An hour later, the radio crackled. Overwatch, this is Eagle 6, target arriving. Black SUV approaching from the south. Blackwood's voice was steady but tinged with awe. Vehicle stopping, target exiting. Through her scope, the distance collapsed. She watched the rear door open, a figure emerging into the sun. She exhaled half a breath, held the rest. The roared. 4 seconds stretched into eternity. Then Blackwood's voice, hit confirmed, target down, clean shot. The valley swallowed the echo. She was already breaking down her rifle, movements precise, unhurried. To her, it wasn't glory. It wasn't vindication. It was just the job. You know, Blackwood said as they packed gear, his tone different now. You could shut us all up any time, one shot at the range. She clicked this case shut. I'm not here to prove anything, Master Sergeant. I'm here to do a job. For the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as an anomaly, not as a burden, but as the only person who could done what none of them believed possible. Back at Fob Obsidian, the energy shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but it shifted. Soldiers who had smirked before now nodded in passing. Captain, once dismissive, called her name during briefings without hesitation. And when Finch cracked a joke about her neighborhood being 2,000-meter shots, it wasn't mockery. It was acknowledgement. But acceptance carried its own weight. One evening, waited outside her quarters. Specialist, a word. Inside, she closed the door and faced her captain. I owe you an apology, began. Unnecessary. It is, the captain insisted. I failed to create an environment of respect, regardless of what was or wasn't in your file. Studied her a moment, then said, respect is most valuable when earned, not demanded. Gave a small, grim smile. Fair enough, but you'd already earned it. I should have recognized it sooner. Her eyes flicked to the scar its collar. A reminder realized, not just of pain but of precision. Your file been updated with appropriate clearance, she added. Whatever you need for this unit, you'll have it. After she left, opened her footlocker. Inside lay a worn photograph. A younger version of herself standing beside a tall man with glasses, rifles slung casually as though hunting was just another language between them. Her father. She traced the outline of his face with her eyes, whispering to the silence. You were right, it's not just about the math. The following week she did something no one expected. She gathered a group on the long-range course, Finch, even Blackwood, and began teaching. Not drills, not dogma, but patterns. Wind moves like water, she explained, sketching diagrams in the dirt. It creates currents, eddies, bullets swim through them. Leaned in, fascinated. So you're mapping three-dimensional flow. Exactly. Finch frowned, but they don't teach this, too complex. They said it was impractical, she replied, until it is. By the end of the session, frustration had shifted into awe. Even Blackwood listened with unguarded respect. From the edge of the range, Colonel and Chief Mercer watched. She's not just teaching technique, whispered beside them. She's changing how they think. Nodded slowly, that was the intention. But wasn't trying to change anyone. She wasn't proving herself anymore. She was simply passing on what she knew, the patterns, the patience, the impossible shots made possible by refusing to accept limits. And in that quiet transfer of knowledge, something began to heal. Not just the team, not just their respect for her, but something within her too. She no longer carried the alone. What does it mean to carry a skill no one else believes is possible? For it meant silence. For weeks, silence had been her armor. She walked through laughter, carried the weight of suspicion, endured the sideways glances. But now the silence was different. It followed her into the tactical operations center. It shadowed her in the mess hall. Soldiers no longer smirked. They paused, they looked, they nodded. And sometimes, silence said more than words. One morning, Colonel summoned her to a briefing room. No other officers, no distractions. Just the Colonel, Chief Warrant Officer Mercer, and a map spread wide across the table. Specialist began, her voice clipped. New assignment, similar parameters to Kandahar. The target's compound is fixed, but this time confirmation of identity before engagement. You'll be at extreme range. Mercer slid a hard case across the table. Inside, optics so advanced they looked closer to science fiction than field issue. Straight from DARPA, he said, faint amusement flickering in his weathered eyes. Atmospheric correction algorithms, enhanced clarity. Thought you'd appreciate them. For the first time, something like genuine animation touched his expression. She ran her fingers along the equipment, not with the awe of someone dazzled by technology, but with the recognition of a craftsman receiving a sharper chisel. When do we deploy? She asked. 3 days, said. You'll select your own team. The implication carried weight. Choice meant trust. It also meant responsibility. Later that night, as desert winds rattled the barracks, sat alone with her notes. Who could she trust at her side? Had already proven curiosity tempered by respect. Blackwood, once her fiercest critic, had volunteered, unasked, for her training sessions. Finch, though brash, had begun to listen, his jokes turning into genuine questions. For the first time since Kandahar, the choice didn't feel like isolation. It felt like possibility. At dawn, she called them together. Blackwood, Finch, and 2 specialists, Warren, a communications expert with calm eyes, and a tactical coordinator who thought in patterns the way she thought in wind. This mission isn't about firepower, she told them. It's about patience. Identity must be confirmed. The window will be narrow, the distance extreme. Leaned over the map. Target compound here, steep terrain. Elevation changes mean tricky lines of sight. Wind patterns will be complex, added. Canyon funnels, thermal shifts by midday. Exactly. His voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation. We'll insert pre-dawn, establish position by 600, we execute tomorrow. Blackwood's brow furrowed. Command said 3 days. She met his gaze. Weather closes in after 48 hours. Storm system moving fast. We miss the window, we lose the mission. There was no pushback this time, no smirk, no challenge, just acceptance. The team moved like clockwork through preparations, gathering gear, calibrating scopes, synchronizing comms. In the armory, Mercer found her fine-tuning her with unusual care. He placed a smaller case on the bench. Custom trigger, he said. 15% reduction on pull weight. Reliable, thought you'd want it. She tested it, fingers brushing over the mechanism with something like reverence. A substantial improvement. He studied her. Zulu Club deserves the best. Her eyes lifted, surprised. You have the badge too. He nodded. Iraq, 2011, 2,950 meters. He gave a small shrug. Not quite your league, but I've had my moments. For a moment, 2 lives of impossible shots shared a space too narrow for anyone else to fully understand. What did you feel afterward? She asked softly. Not pride, Mercer answered after a long pause. More like peace, knowing I'd reached the edge of possibility and found it wasn't where I thought. She nodded slowly. For me, it was empty. He frowned. The shot didn't bring my team back. It only confirmed that distance wasn't the real obstacle. Knowing why you take the shot, that's harder. Mercer said nothing. Some truths didn't need answering. The mission began before dawn. The helicopter thundered low through jagged mountain passes, blades carving the air, before setting them down in darkness 5 kilometers from the target. The rest they covered on foot, moving in silence through rock and dust, boots grinding against stone. By sunrise, they'd reached their plateau exposed, unforgiving terrain, but with a clear line of sight across the valley. The compound stood like a dark tooth against the slope, distant yet defined through optics. "Deployment complete," Warren reported. "Perimeter sensors live, comms stable." And set up side by side, scopes braced against rock. The lay across its bipod like a beast at rest, waiting. "Primary direction northwest, 8 knots, whispered. "Countercurrent developing in the valley, temperature gradient significant." She noted the numbers, adding variables others wouldn't consider. Humidity layers, barometric shifts drift at this latitude. To another, it might look obsessive. To, watching now with new respect, it was art. Hours passed, they waited. The wait was always the true battle. Muscles stiffened, eyes strained. The temptation to shift, to sigh, to release the tension grew unbearable, but never moved unnecessarily. She conserved herself the way she conserved her shots. At 13:47, Warren's voice cut through. "Vehicle approaching from the south. Matches target description." Blackwood's voice followed. "Confirmed black SUV, 2 escorts." Adjusted her scope, her fingers steady. The figure emerged, surrounded by guards. "Facial recognition required," reminded. She switched optics, DARPA enhancements humming quietly as the distant figure sharpened, pixel by pixel, until human features took form. Ran the software comparison. Seconds stretched like hours. The man moved toward the compound entrance. "Confirmation 96%, Warren said at last. "Green light authorized." His voice was low. "Wind 3 meters per second right, 1 mil elevation adjustment." She made the changes without hesitation. Breathing slowed, the world narrowed. The thundered. 6 seconds. Direct hit. "Target down," Blackwood confirmed, voice even but heavy with awe. "Mission complete." The team broke down equipment in silence. The kind of silence that wasn't emptiness but weight, the weight of what they had just done, what they had witnessed. As Pactha glanced at her, sensing something different, a shift so subtle others wouldn't see it. "What is it?" he asked quietly. She zipped the case closed, paused. "For the first time since Kandahar," she said softly, "it feels like I'm part of a team again." He absorbed the words, their quiet ache, their fragile hope. "That's what we are now," he said simply, "a team." For a moment she didn't answer. Then the faintest ghost of a smile touched her lips. And in that sliver of expression, realized something. The impossible shot hadn't defined her. The impossible loneliness had. Now maybe that was beginning to change. Why had she survived when the rest of her team had not? The question lingered with her every time she closed her eyes. She never asked it aloud, never admitted it even in the privacy of her quarters. But it lived in the scar along her neck, in the worn pages of her notebook, in the silence that seemed to settle around her whenever this case locked shut. After the second mission, recognition spread through Fob Obsidian like desert fire. Not loudly, not in praise or banners. That wasn't the way of soldiers. It spread in the small things, nods in corridors, doors held open, a seat saved in the briefing room where she once sat alone. For most, those gestures might have felt like validation, for they were only adjustments in the background noise. The truth was, they didn't care. The bullet didn't care. Respect or ridicule, the shot remained the same. But something was shifting inside her, whether she wanted it or not. One morning, she found Blackwood waiting by the long-range course. He had never come early before, never been the kind to show curiosity unless it served his command. Yet here he was, squinting against the rising sun, rifle case in hand. "Thought I'd see how you do it," he said simply. She studied him, searching for sarcasm. There was none. So she set up targets at extreme ranges, 1,500 meters, 2,000, even a steel plate hidden behind the shimmer of valley wind. She didn't instruct him directly at first. She simply showed him how she observed, how she measured air currents by the bend of grass, by the way dust clung to rock faces, by the irregular flight of crows riding thermals. Wind moves like water, she explained at last, sketching in the dirt with a stick. It swirls, it carves channels, a bullet swims through it. Blackwood frowned, wiping sweat from his brow. That's not what they teach. No, they teach formulas simple enough to be memorized. My father said the truth is more complex. That's why most shooters stop where possibility begins. For the first time, her voice held a flicker of pride, not in herself, in him. Later joined them, curiosity sharpening his expression as always. Finch came too, though his jokes had dulled into genuine questions. One by one, others drifted onto the range, drawn less by orders than by something harder to define, the pull of watching someone turn impossibility into method. By midday, the place looked more like a classroom than a firing lane. Soldiers crouched in the dust, listening as she explained turbulence patterns, demonstrating calculations far beyond their manuals. "You're not aiming at where the target is," she said evenly. "You're building a path through shifting layers of air, anticipating where the bullet will arrive when the world has already changed." Even Finch, who had once called her sweetheart, leaned forward, brow furrowed, as though he were hearing truth for the first time. From a distance, Colonel and Mercer watched. "She's not just teaching them to shoot," murmured beside them. "She's changing how they think." Nodded, expression unreadable. That was always the intention. But herself had no such intention. She wasn't trying to transform anyone. She was only passing on what she had been given: patterns, patience, a way of seeing beyond conventional limits. That evening in her quarters, she took out the old photograph again. Her father's smile was crooked, his glasses tilted, his hands steady around a rifle he treated less like a weapon than a chalkboard for physics. She heard his voice in memory, calm, insistent, always reminding her that the bullet obeyed laws, not opinions. He had been a physicist, brilliant and eccentric, obsessed with fluid dynamics. To him, shooting was not violence but mathematics expressed in motion. He'd built targets at impossible ranges across the Montana hills, teaching his daughter to read wind by watching how grass bent, how shadows shifted, how clouds churned. By 15, she was hitting distances most soldiers never attempted. By 18, she was alone. Cancer had taken him quickly, leaving her with notebooks filled with equations, a house too quiet, and skills she didn't know where to carry. The army had given her an answer, but not the one she expected. She whispered to the photograph, as she often did when silence pressed too hard. "You were right, Dad. It's not just about the math." The next day, Colonel called her to the office again. This time, the tone was different, less about orders, more about legacy. "Headquarters has requested something unusual," the colonel said. "A training program, 6 weeks, rotating groups of advanced snipers from different units. They want you to teach your methods." Blinked, stunned into stillness. "I'm a field operator, not an instructor." His eyes held hers. "What you showed them yesterday says otherwise. You're uniquely positioned to make this work. Your father's theories deserve wider application. You're the one to carry them forward." Said nothing at first. Teaching was vulnerability. Teaching was exposure. For years, her survival had been in silence, in shadows, in bearing skill without explanation. To stand before others and reveal, that was something else entirely. "I'll need resources," she said finally. "Specialized optics, range access without restrictions, and my team remains intact." "You'll have them," promised. When she stepped into the corridor, was waiting, leaning casually against the wall, 2 coffees in hand. He offered one without a word. She accepted, the warmth grounding her. You heard, she said. Small base, he replied with a faint smile. They walked together in silence for a while, the air smelling faintly of dust and fuel. Finally, he asked, "Are you really going to do it? Become an instructor?" "Apparently." "You should," he said simply. "It suits you more than you think." She stopped, surprised. My father would have been better, he understood people. I focus on the technical. Turned to face her fully. I watched you yesterday. You didn't just teach equations. You saw what each soldier needed. That's not technical, that's understanding. She didn't answer. Not then. His words pressed too close to truths she wasn't ready to accept. That night she returned to the observation deck. The mountains loomed vast, black silhouettes against a star-heavy sky. Joined her again, and this time she spoke without prompting. "You asked about Kandahar," she said. He nodded. "We tracked a bomb maker for months, responsible for dozens of casualties. Found his compound at last, but during approach we triggered a device. 3 killed instantly, 2 critically injured. I took shrapnel." She touched her scar unconsciously. "Command ordered extraction. They said opportunity lost. But in the chaos I spotted him fleeing, toward a vehicle. I had seconds to decide. Nearest shooting position was a ridge 3,241 meters away. Through a sandstorm." His voice was low. "You made that call yourself?" She nodded. "I commandeered a vehicle, reached the ridge, had 30 minutes before visibility was gone. Command authorized the shot. I didn't ask, I just did it." Her voice did not waver, but her eyes did, flickering with something had never seen before. The math was solvable. The challenge was accepting it wasn't impossible. She looked at him, the starlight softening her features. "My father used to say the boundaries of possibility are mostly imaginary. The real obstacle is believing them." Felt a chill, not from the night air but from the weight of her words. For the first time he understood. The Zulu badge wasn't just a record. It was a philosophy, a way of refusing limits others accepted. And it had cost her everything. For a long while neither spoke. The wind swept over them, carrying dust across the deck, rattling the railing. At last she whispered, almost to herself, "The shot didn't bring my team back. It just left me behind." Wanted to speak, to offer comfort, but he knew better. Some truths didn't need answers. They only needed to be carried. What's harder, pulling the trigger, or teaching someone else how not to miss? The question gnawed at her as she stood on the long-range course at dawn. For years, her survival had been tied to silence, to being the one behind the glass, carrying equations no one else knew how to read. But now, half a dozen operators from different units stood in a semicircle around her, waiting. Waiting for her to explain the unexplainable. The mountains stretched behind them, jagged and indifferent. Wind funneled through the valley, carrying dust across the plateau. She knelt in the dirt, drawing simple lines with a stick. "Textbooks treat wind like a number," she began, her voice steady. 8 knots left to right, 5 knots headwind. They want you to plug it into a chart. But the bullet doesn't move through numbers. It moves through air. Air isn't static, it's fluid, it behaves like water." The men and women listened, some skeptical, others intent. She pointed toward the canyon where grass bent in uneven patterns, where dust shifted in invisible spirals. "Look there. You see the way the grasses lean in one direction, then snap back in another. That's not random. That's 2 layers of wind moving opposite each other. If you don't account for both, your shot dies halfway." A young lieutenant frowned. "But the manuals." The manuals were written for distances where variables cancel themselves out. Out here, they don't. At 2,000 meters, 1 knot of wind becomes a miss by feet, not inches. The skepticism wavered. She handed her scope to the lieutenant, adjusted the angle. "Watch the dust line along that ridge. It's moving counter to the grass below. That's your cross current. It's invisible until you look for it." He peered through the glass. His posture changed. Quiet realization dawned. That was how it always began, disbelief, then curiosity, then the shift into seeing patterns where chaos had lived before. Behind them, Blackwood crouched in the dirt, arms crossed, listening harder than anyone. Took notes with meticulous care. Even Finch, once quick to mock, leaned forward, asking sharp questions instead of jokes. By midday, the session had turned into something else. Not a lecture, not even instruction. It became dialogue, soldiers throwing out variables, guiding them toward answers without ever giving the solution outright. "It's not about memorizing formulas," she said. "It's about recognizing patterns in the environment. The bullet doesn't care about pride. It doesn't care about excuses. It only cares about whether you respected its path." Later in the rec room, the talk spread. Operators debated her equations over mugs of burnt coffee, sketching diagrams on napkins. For the first time, respect wasn't grudging. It was eager. Colonel watched this unfold from a distance, a faint smile tugging at her otherwise austere face. She murmured, "She's not just teaching ballistics. She's teaching them how to think differently." And yet teaching came at a cost. That night, alone in her quarters, performed her ritual. She disassembled the piece by piece, cleaning each component with practiced precision. Normally, the rhythm soothed her, gave her mind a place to rest. But tonight it didn't. Because teaching forced her to speak truths she had once carried silently, and speaking them made the weight heavier, not lighter. Her father had once warned her, "When you share the patterns, you share the responsibility. Every shot they take with what you've taught, part of it belongs to you." Was she ready for that? She pulled the photograph from her locker again. Her father's crooked smile met her steady gaze. "Legacy," she whispered. "That's what you wanted, isn't it?" The next morning, Colonel confirmed it. "Headquarters wants this program expanded," she said. 6 weeks, rotating groups. You'll be the lead instructor." "I'm a field operator," replied automatically. "You're both now," the colonel countered. "What you carry isn't just skill, it's perspective, and it's needed." Said nothing. The at her side felt heavier than usual, as though echoing the decision she hadn't yet made. Later she found on the observation deck, scribbling in his notebook. He looked up, saw the conflict in her expression. "You're taking it, aren't you? Do I have a choice?" He studied her a moment. "Maybe not, but it's not punishment. You're good at this, better than you think." She turned away, eyes scanning the mountains. "My father understood people, I don't." "I was there on the range," said quietly. "I saw how you adjusted for each of us, how you knew what to show and what to hold back. That wasn't numbers, that was knowing people." She didn't answer, but his words lodged somewhere she couldn't shake. That night she returned to the deck again. Stars burned above, sharp and merciless. She spoke before could. "You wanted to know the full Kandahar story." His silence said yes. She told him about the blast, about her teammates broken, about the decision to take the ridge alone, about the storm closing in, about the 30-minute window, about the math that was solvable, but only if she believed in what everyone else called impossible. When she finished, the silence between them was thick. "You didn't just make the shot," said finally. "You refused to accept the limit." Her eyes met his, gray and steady, and it didn't bring them back. "No," he agreed softly, "but it gave the rest of us a chance to learn from you." For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe differently, not lighter, but less burdened. Sharing the story didn't ease the weight, but it meant she no longer carried it alone. The following week, the first group of rotating snipers arrived. Hardened men and women, some skeptical, some curious, all elite. They expected drills, formulas, and perhaps a myth to be disproven. What they got was kneeling in the dirt, tracing spirals of wind with a stick. "You've all been told there are limits," she said. "That some shots are impossible. That's not true. The bullet doesn't know impossible. Only we do, and that's what I'm here to undo." Skepticism lingered in their faces. She ignored it. Instead, she led them onto the range, pointed at the horizon. There's a steel plate at 2,800 meters. You won't hit it today. Not because it's impossible, but because you haven't learned to see yet. By the end of this program, some of you will. And when you do, you'll understand something more important than marksmanship. You'll understand that limits are choices. Blackwood, watching from the side, shook his head slowly, something like pride flickering in his expression. Finch whispered, almost reverently, "She's rewriting the rule book." But there was no rule book. There never had been. There was only her father's voice, her scar, her badge, and the belief that survival belonged not to those who accepted limits, but to those who dared to test them. And now, for the first time, she wasn't testing them alone. What happens when training suddenly becomes war? The question came sooner than anyone expected. 2 weeks into the program, the first rotation of snipers was still struggling to grasp her methods. Some were beginning to see patterns, to read currents in grass and dust. Others still clung to their charts, their formulas, their disbelief that something so fluid could ever be mastered. Then the alert came. Colonel gathered them in the operations center, her voice clipped. Intel confirms a high-value target transiting through the western range. Small convoy. No time to mobilize a full unit. Closest assets are here. She pointed to them, her trainees, Blackwood, Finch, Warren. This isn't an exercise, the colonel continued. Target must be eliminated before reaching the border. Range will exceed 2,500 meters. Engagement window, less than 20 minutes. The room fell silent. They weren't ready, they knew it, but ready or not, the mission was theirs. She didn't argue, she only asked where. Moments later, they were in helicopters, blades hammering the air, shadows racing over ridges. Sat silent, eyes closed, fingers curled lightly around her weather meter. To the others, she looked calm. Inside, something older stirred, memory of Kandahar, of loss, of being the only one left. Not again, she told herself, not this time. They set down on a barren plateau overlooking a narrow pass. The convoy was already on the move, dust trails rising like signal flares against the horizon. Range 2,600 meters, reported, scanning through his scope. Wind nor-northwest, 7 knots at surface, crosswind higher. The trainees spread out, fumbling to set positions, panic bleeding into their movements. One cursed softly when his bipod collapsed in the dirt. Another muttered that the range was beyond regulation limits. Crouched low, her voice steady. Breathe, look at the terrain, don't fight the wind, read it. But the convoy was closing, the window narrowing. Blackwood's voice cut in. We've got one shot at this, specialist. Who takes it? For a moment hesitated. The lay before her, waiting. She could take it herself. End the mission clean. But the badge on her chest weighed heavier than steel. Her father's words echoed. When you share the patterns, you share the responsibility. She turned to a trainee, Sergeant Vega, sharp-eyed, skeptical until yesterday. He froze under her gaze. You're on the rifle. His mouth opened. Ma'am, You're ready, she said firmly. I'll spot, calculations, Blackwood perimeter. There was no room for doubt. Together they set up, dust stinging their eyes. Adjusted Vega's position, her hands sure, calm. Don't force it. Let the rifle settle. The wind will do half the work if you let it. Read variables, his voice quick but steady. Cross-current mid-range. Adjust 0.8 mils right. Elevation plus 0.5. Target approaching choke point, Warren reported over comms. The SUV rolled into view, sunlight flashing off its windshield. The moment was here. His voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as steel. Focus on the path, not the target. Build the corridor. Breathe. Vega inhaled, held. The roared. 6 endless seconds stretched as the bullet cut across invisible rivers of air. For a heartbeat, the entire team held still, as if afraid their own movements might alter its path. Then dust bloomed from the convoy. The SUV lurched. Shouts echoed faintly across the valley. The target collapsed in the dirt, motionless. "Hit confirmed," said, voice low but awed. For a moment, no one moved. Then the trainees exhaled as one, disbelief giving way to stunned laughter, to shouts, to the kind of relief that shakes bone. But didn't laugh. She watched Vega's hands tremble as he broke down the rifle. Watched the shock in his eyes, the realization that he had just crossed into a world where limits dissolved. She remembered her own first impossible shot, the emptiness afterward, the silence that followed her for years. She crouched beside him, spoke quietly so only he could hear. "The shot belongs to you, but the responsibility belongs to us, all of us. Don't carry it alone." He nodded, swallowing hard. The team extracted quickly, fatting into the mountains as helicopters roared low. Back at the base, the trainees were celebrated quietly, their success marked in after-action reports and silent handshakes. But stayed apart, cleaning in the armory. The ritual steadied her, but tonight her hands moved slower. She thought of her father again, of equations in old notebooks, of words she hadn't understood until now. Legacy was heavier than recoil. Later found her there, alone with the rifle's components laid out like puzzle pieces. "You gave him the shot," he said softly. "It wasn't mine to take. You knew he might miss." "Yes. And if he had?" Her hands stilled. She looked up, gray eyes unreadable. "Then the weight would been mine to carry. That's what it means to teach." Studied her, understanding dawning. She wasn't afraid of missing. She was afraid of them carrying the silence she had borne alone since Kandahar. "You're not alone anymore," he said finally. Her jaw tightened, but her voice betrayed a crack. "That's what I'm afraid of." For the first time, he saw the depth of her conflict. The soldier who could master wind, distance, physics itself, but who trembled at the thought of watching others walk into the storm she had survived. Outside, the desert wind howled. Inside, she reassembled the piece by piece, as though putting herself back together. But the truth was, something had shifted. The program was no longer just about impossible shots. It was about whether she could bear the cost of sharing them. What does it feel like to watch someone else carry your skill into the unknown? For it felt like standing on again, wind cutting past her, dust stinging her eyes, heart steady on the outside but racing underneath. Only this time she wasn't behind the rifle. Her trainees were. The request came suddenly. A target convoy crossing a mountain border. Engagement window, razor-thin, had expected to lead. Instead, Colonel pulled her aside. "This one's theirs," the colonel said quietly. "Your program needs to be tested, without you." The words landed heavier than any recoil. Instinct screamed against it. She remembered Kandahar, the silence of being last alive. She remembered Sergeant Vega's trembling hands after the shot, the shadow in his eyes. "They're not ready," she said flatly. "They'll never be ready if you never let them prove it." And that was it, orders final. She stood on the tarmac as the helicopter lifted away, dust curling around her boots, her own still cased at her side. She watched the rotors fade into the horizon, carrying pieces of herself she hadn't realized she'd given away. Hours later, the comms lit up. Warren's voice came first, tense but clear. "Target in sight. Range 2,900. Crosswinds unstable." Closed her eyes. She could almost see the valley, feel the currents, run the equations in her head. Her hands twitched as if adjusting a scope that wasn't in front of her. Then Vega's voice, taking the shot. The silence after the report stretched like a knife's edge. Finally, Blackwood's voice, gruff but certain. "Hit confirmed, target down." The operations room erupted in muted applause, officers nodding, analysts typing rapidly. Another success, another proof. But felt something else. Relief, yes, but also fear. Because if they could succeed without her, then they could also fail. and failure at these ranges was not measured in missed plates, it was measured in lives. When the team returned, the air around them was different. Pride, yes, but also a new kind of gravity. They had crossed into territory where nothing felt impossible anymore. Vega approached her first, holding the she had once placed in his hands. "We did it," he said, voice raw with disbelief. She looked at him carefully, noting the tremor in his fingers, the tightness in his jaw. She recognized it, the aftermath, the realization that distance meant nothing when it was a man's life at the other end. "Remember," she said quietly, "the shot belongs to you, but the weight belongs to all of us." He nodded, but she saw it, the same shadow she had carried since Kandahar. Later that night, she found on the observation deck again. He leaned against the railing, staring at stars as if searching for patterns in them the way she searched in wind. "They're good," he said as she approached. "Not just lucky, good." She said nothing. "You should be proud." Her jaw tightened. Pride doesn't bring them back. Neither does silence. His words cut deeper than he knew. For years, silence had been her shield. Now it felt like a cage. She turned away, staring at the horizon. "Every time they fire at that range, I feel it, like I'm there again, like I'm the one taking the shot." His voice softened. "That's not weakness, that's responsibility. You gave them your knowledge. Of course it feels like you're carrying it with them." She let the words settle, but they didn't ease the weight. If anything, they made it heavier. Days passed. The trainees continued to practice, their confidence growing. They began teaching each other, passing her equations from notebook to notebook, sketching turbulence models in dirt the way she once had. One evening, she came to the range to find Blackwood standing before a group of new arrivals, explaining wind layers with the same stick she had once used. He noticed her watching, straightened slightly, and for the first time his voice held no trace of mockery. "This is her method," he told the group. "Don't take shortcuts, don't pretend you know better. She sees what most of us miss. Learn to see like she does." Step forward quietly, taking the stick from his hand. "Not like I do, like you will. I can't teach instinct. Only patterns, the rest, that's yours." The group fell silent, the respect in their eyes unmistakable. But that night in her quarters sat with her father's photograph again. The smile, the glasses, the rifle across his arms. "You were right," she whispered. "Legacy isn't numbers in a notebook. It's people carrying it forward. But why does it feel heavier now than when it was just mine?" She didn't have an answer. The next mission came fast. A target on the move through a canyon, engagement distance uncertain, winds unpredictable. Command assigned one of her trainees as lead with spotting, was ordered to remain at base. She stood in the ops center, headset pressed tight as the mission unfolded. Variables read aloud, calculations made, then the shot. But this time silence. "Miss," came the voice over comms. Her stomach clenched. "Adjusting," said calmly. "A second shot." Silence, then chaos, shouts, movement. Convoy accelerating, target shielded. The feed cut into static. His hand gripped the console, knuckles white. Minutes dragged like hours before Blackwood's voice returned. Target escaped, 2 friendlies wounded. The room fell into silence, heavier than any celebration. Failure. Ripped the headset off, heart hammering. Not because of the mission, but because she knew exactly what they had missed. A thermal current mid-range. A variable too subtle for numbers alone. And now 2 soldiers bore the cost. Later found her alone in the armory, rifle parts spread before her. "This isn't on you," the colonel said. "It is," whispered. "Every calculation they make carries my hand, every miss carries my silence." "They'll learn," replied. "At what cost?" The colonel didn't answer. Some truths had no comfort. That night found her again on the deck. She stood rigid, arms crossed, staring into the dark. "You blame yourself," he said softly. They used my methods, my equations. They missed something I should have taught. You can't control every variable, not in the wind, not in people. She turned on him, eyes flashing for the first time. Then why teach at all? Why pass on something that can kill them as easily as save them? Held her gaze. Because silence kills more. Because if you don't teach them, they'll never even try, and the impossible will stay impossible. Her breath shuddered. Slowly her shoulders eased. She turned back to the horizon. Maybe he was right. Maybe silence was the real enemy. But inside, the scar ached. The memory of Kandahar whispered that every shot carried ghosts, and now those ghosts no longer belonged to her alone. How many ghosts can one bullet carry? Asked herself that as she sat in the operations center, map unfolded before her, briefing still echoing in her ears. The target wasn't just high value. He was the architect of half the ambushes her unit had suffered for years, the shadow behind Kandahar itself. Intelligence had him cornered in a mountainous stronghold, guarded, hidden, shielded by terrain and distance. The range, over 3,200 meters. The number hit her like a whisper from her past. Kandahar, the badge, the storm, the shot that had left her team behind. Colonel's voice was even, but the weight in her eyes betrayed everything. No one else can make this shot, not in these conditions. This one is yours. Didn't argue, she only nodded. The team assembled before dawn. Blackwood, Finch, Warren, and Vega, the trainee who had once trembled under her gaze. They geared up in silence, movements practiced, eyes heavy with what they knew was at stake. The helicopter carried them low across jagged ridges, blades thunderous against the dawn. Sat still across her knees, eyes closed, not praying, not hopping, only remembering. Her father's words, Kandahar, the silence. They landed on a barren plateau, wind slicing through the air, dust coiling in invisible rivers. The stronghold lay across the valley, built into a cliff, its walls bristling with guards. Range 3,214 meters, confirmed through his scope. Lay prone, braced against rock, scope glass cold against her cheek. Her notebook lay open beside her, equations written in her father's hand mixed with her own. Wind patterns shifted across the valley, unpredictable, cruel. Cross-currents spiraled like whirlpools. Thermal layers shimmered with rising heat. Unstable, Blackwood muttered, no shot in hell. His voice was steady, there's always a path. She closed her eyes, breathed, let the world fall away. She remembered her father standing on Montana hillsides, pointing to grass bending in two directions at once. She remembered his voice, the bullet swims, it doesn't fight the river, it flows with it. When she opened her eyes again, the chaos resolved into patterns. Invisible corridors carved by wind, narrow as threads but real. Read out numbers, pressure, speed, temperature. She listened, adjusted, but more than numbers, she trusted instinct. Trusted the way the air moved, the way dust rose and fell. The target stepped into view. A man surrounded by guards, face unmistakable. Windows closing, Warren said. His breath slowed. Her fingers settled on the trigger. The thundered. 6 seconds. The world held still. The bullet cut across layers of turbulence, riding invisible rivers, carving through currents that twisted and shifted. For a heartbeat, doubt crept in, that old, cruel whisper. Impossible. Then the target dropped. Silence. Hit confirmed, whispered awe in his voice. The stronghold erupted in chaos. Guards scrambled, sirens blared, but it didn't matter. The shot had already rewritten everything. The team exfiltrated quickly, retreating across ridges as helicopters roared low. But the silence inside was louder than the escape. Back at base, the after-action reports were clinical. Commanders praised. Analysts nodded. The colonel herself clasped his shoulder, eyes harder than usual but with something like gratitude beneath them. Yet felt none of it. That night she sat alone on the observation deck, stars heavy above her. There was caste at her feet. Her father's photograph lay in her hands. She whispered into the wind, "I made the shot, again, but it didn't bring them back, it never does." For the first time didn't interrupt. He just stood beside her, silent, letting her words hang. She looked at him finally, eyes tired but steady. The badge means nothing. The distance means nothing. What matters is what we do with the silence afterward. Nodded slowly, "And what will you do?" Closed the photograph, tucking it carefully into her jacket. She turned back to the mountains, their black silhouettes sharp against the stars. "I'll keep teaching," she said softly, "so maybe they won't carry the silence alone." And in that moment something shifted, not lighter, not easier, but different. Because dignity doesn't always shout. It doesn't always carry medals or badges or applause. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.